Hey guys, what is up and welcome to a new League of Legends video. Now today's video will be a little bit different because we'll be talking about Apdo or DOPA and his overall thoughts on the current meta, solo queue and everything after reaching rank 1 once again in Korea. There's a lot of very interesting points that he does make, a lot of great insight into the game of League of Legends, so I mean a lot of really cool things. Now if you're unaware, Apdo or DOPA is a very well-known player in the League of Legends scene. He is a Korean player who's regarded to have one of the best game knowledge in League of Legends, period. He's constantly getting rank 1 and extremely high elos on different servers and different accounts. He was known to elo boost for a very long time and being extremely successful at it. And all in all, the best way to think about it is if you were to somehow clone Faker to make a Faker version 2, well, that person will probably be named Apdo. So in this video, we'll be going through what essentially can be described as his secrets to solo queue and success in solo queue and winning games in the current meta, what you should be doing. Now keep in mind a lot of these points, or some of them, are going to be more focused on mid lane because he is a mid lane player, but other than that, there is still a lot of different points regarded to just League of Legends in general or even other roles. Now I will be referencing a Reddit thread that essentially summed up all of Apdo's or DOPA's thoughts after reaching rank 1, but I will not be talking about every single point made, so if you want a full in-depth look for yourself, I'll have a link to it down below. So the first point we'll be talking about that he mentions is the relationship between laners and the junglers and how it's completely different. Before it was all about how the laners have to just dominate their laning phase and have the jungler come to the lane every now and then, essentially just to cover for them while they maybe roam or back to base. Essentially it was the jungler supporting the laner, but now it's the exact opposite because now the laners have to support the junglers and help the jungler grow and disrupt the enemy jungler as well. So he says there's 3 things that a mid laner has to do. Number 1, make it easier for your jungler to gank. Number 2, make it easier for your jungler to secure Scuttle Crab. And number 3, secure your side's birds or the raptors at all costs so that the enemy jungler does not steal them and get the free experience. And to sort of build on that point, he states how again the game has changed to where winning lane just usually isn't enough anymore, unless of course you're smurfing and you just know exactly what to do next and how to snowball your victory and just get objectives. The main important thing now is working with your jungler, making the jungler win their lane essentially, and helping them throughout the game. He also says one of the most important things that mid laners simply do not do anymore is look at the 3 minutes and 10-second mark in the game, because that's usually when the junglers go for the Scuttle Crab, and you should always plan ahead and be ready to help your jungler secure that Scuttle Crab when that time comes. So champions that excel and have a decent power spike around 3 minutes into the game are ones that are just simply very good in the current meta and the ones that you should be playing, which is an example as to why Victor, even though he is still a very good champion, is not really the best at the very moment because his power spike around 3 minutes in isn't really anything too good. The next major point that he talks about is a very interesting one because essentially he says Aurelion Sol is or was the most broken champion in the game, and even after the nerf he is still really strong but just actually manageable now. He goes on to say that any player that just abused Aurelion Sol to climb elo is essentially boosted trash. That's literally what he says, because Aurelion Sol was just such a champion where it was extremely hard to deal with him, and how the biggest flaw whenever you would face another mid laner that's just simply better than you is that normally the person that's worse would lose experience and CS, but with Aurelion Sol he kind of makes up for that, but just simply maxing your W, turning it on and just pushing in the wave by essentially standing in one spot and not having to really do anything. So essentially he just calls out all Aurelion Sol one-trick ponies, calling them boosted trash and how Aurelion Sol is just way too broken. Now Apdo or DOPA actually regards Faker as one of the best players in League of Legends as well, and probably the only other player that he actually thinks is just as good, if not maybe better than himself. But he talks about why Faker is so good and the greatest laner in the world, and the reason is quite simple. Number 1, he actually forces the enemy jungler to his lane, which obviously relieves pressure off of his own jungler and the other 2 lanes, top and bottom, but he also tends to not die to the enemy jungler very often at all, so he just wastes the enemy jungler's time very frequently, and it just makes the game a lot easier for the rest of his team. He then makes a point talking about what he believes to be the best composition or team comp right now in the current meta. For instance, you want to have an AD bruiser in the top lane, maybe someone like Darius, having something like Elise jungle, a mid lane AP that doesn't force the enemy to carry cleanse, and then something along the lines of like Jinx or Ashe with Braum or Karma. But he says that the bot lane isn't that important in terms of what the champions are, and he said Jhin is a really fun and decent champion, but not the best when it comes to the highest of elo. He then goes out and says that Gangplank is now flat out trash, not because of himself, but because he doesn't fit the meta anymore with any of the meta junglers, and Talia now, from being insanely overpowered, is just very meh at the very moment. Now you might be wondering, what exactly does he mean when he says mid AP that doesn't force the enemy to carry cleanse? Well, it's quite simple. If you go someone like Lissandra or Twisted Fate, then chances are the person you're laning against, if they're smart, will go cleanse so they can instantly remove that CC that you annoyingly have in your kits. Which, if they have cleanse, if your jungler Elise for instance comes to gank, well, it's going to make things more difficult to work just because of the fact that they have cleanse. If they have maybe instead something like teleport or ignite, that's one less defensive summoner, so when the Elise comes in for the gank, it'll be that much easier to actually kill them. He also says how people use the damage per minute to compare people and just how well someone did in a game, but it's not really all that accurate because it depends a lot on your champion and your situation. It's all about how well that you can play your game and make plays that will turn the game around. It's not always about the amount of damage that you were able to deal, but it is a very good or at least rough way to determine maybe how much impact you had. He also goes on to talk about how you would beat LeBlanc as someone like Victor. Now, I don't want to kind of go too depth into this, but essentially he says the secret is to bring heal. And the LeBlanc will either go teleport or ignite, and if she goes ignite, then you should win the lane because you can play as passive as you want, and as long as you don't die to her, you're good to go. He also mentions how with Victor, you have to level your Q twice at level 4 because the trading potential with it is just way too important. The next point that he makes is saying how if you are on the blue team and your jungler is ganking top, then you have to ward your birds or your raptors right away, or at least very soon, because a lot of the time if the enemy jungler is smart enough, they're going to want to try and take advantage of the jungler or your jungler being on the opposite side of the map. They will naturally try to counter jungle and take all of the experience on your side of the jungle, so what you want to do is ward it. This will tell you where the enemy jungler is, you'll know exactly what they're doing, and some of the times you might even be able to go ahead and get the kill on them. But speaking of the Raptors as a mid laner, it's actually really important that if in the very beginning of the game, maybe after the first wave, you can go to the enemy jungler's camp where the Raptors are and take at least one small bird, because this will completely disrupt the jungle's path. Because if the jungler is doing one of the more typical jungle paths where they go maybe something like golem to blue to wolf to bird to crab to red path, well, chances are they're going to be not getting the experience that they want after finishing the Raptor camp. They're not going to be hitting the level that they want after the red buff as well, and it's just going to disrupt them and put them in a very awkward position, and it's really that easy for you to do so. He does say that you shouldn't try to force taking that one small bird or one small raptor. I mean, if you can't, then obviously don't do it, but if you see like you have the opportunity to do so, you should definitely do it after the first wave. But then speaking of junglers and mid laners, well, a lot of the junglers, like for instance Elise, try to get ganks at level 3, so the fastest time that you can expect to get ganked in the mid lane is around 2 minutes and 46 seconds. So if the enemy jungler you're facing is someone that can do early ganks, especially at level 3, try to harass and push your lane hard up until 2 minutes and 35 seconds. Not only will you outtrade your opponent a lot of the times, but you'll also push the wave into their tower, making it hard to CS, but then you want to kind of chill at the bottom side of your lane because the jungler will usually gank from the top side, and after 2 minutes and 55 seconds, the enemy jungler should go away, or at least be ready to dodge maybe something like a flash cocoon. He says how solo queue and pro games are completely different. The only thing that's similar is the fact that they're both playing League of Legends, so try not to always take exactly 100% what happens in a pro game and apply it to solo queue. Apdo also says one of the reasons he's so good at this game is because he's so emotional. He becomes very mad when he loses, but he also knows that he has to learn from his losses, and he's also very known for his Kassadin and Twisted Fates, but apparently the only reason he even started to play Kassadin and Twisted Fate is because he actually got destroyed by someone who plays those two champions. So he ended up picking them up for himself, which actually kind of reminds me of myself, because you guys know whenever I get absolutely destroyed by a certain champion in solo queue, a lot of the times I have a video coming out in the next few days saying, yeah, this is the new OP champion. He also mentions how his pocket pick at the moment is Veigar. A lot of people forget about him, and even if your team has no CC, Veigar's E ability is just almost all that you need. But somewhat on the contrary, he does go ahead and say that Fizz, which is another champion he's pretty well known for, is just absolutely garbage in the current meta and you shouldn't play him. He then talks about how a lot of people kind of argue what's better, flat magic resistance or CDR per level blues. He says for the most part it doesn't matter too much, but he does believe that runes, the purpose of them is to help you win the laning phase, so for the most part flat magic resistance should just be better because that translates to gold, which equals items. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter too much, it just kind of depends on which champion you're playing. Here's one that I think is really funny. So he talks about Yasuo and he says, bullshit aside, Yasuo is a broken champion. He says that people always talk about how he's a very high skill cap champion, but the thing about Yasuo, or the secret about Yasuo, is knowing how to limit yourself and control yourself when playing such an overpowered champion. The biggest weakness that Yasuo has is players just going way too ham on him and just putting themselves in situations that they really should not be in. He's just that strong of a champion that always makes you want to go in the middle and 1v5 people and just make plays happen, but again, if you know how to limit yourself, he thinks that Yasuo is insanely broken. He also says that the junglers do not have to try and read the laner's mind, but instead it's kind of the opposite. And the difference between a low elo gank and a high elo gank is that high elo players will burn flash even before the jungler comes in for the gank. They'll be the ones that initiate the gank when the jungler is waiting to go in. But in low elo, it's always the jungler that has to make the first move or make the first flash or make the first initiation, and then the laner follows up. So that's the main difference. High elo ganks, the laner will actually start the gank off and go in and make the play, while low elo, the jungler will be the one that has to force the play to happen. He also thinks that Twisted Fate needs a little bit of nerfs before he gets some buffs because his gold card is probably one of the most reliable stuns in the entire game. And how, just like I said in my previous video talking about top 5 mid laners, Twisted Fate's ultimate and his true strength comes from his ultimate even when you don't have to use it, because the fact that you're level 6, everyone has to play with that in mind and play a different style. He then goes and talks about ADCs for a little bit, saying how everyone crying about ADC this season is complete bullshit because apparently if you look at someone like Deft, well, he's the second in Korean solo queue and he's an AD carry player. So he's saying if you play someone like maybe Ezreal, Jinx, or Twitch, you can probably just carry yourself. And the problem with ADC is the fact that they usually take about 3 core items to really hit that power spike and start doing a lot of work. But unfortunately, people in solo queue are just kind of bad and they just can't last that long, and ADCs just really don't get their power spike when they want to or when they need it. He also says how talent is much more important than just raw effort in gaming. He goes on to say how mid Annie at the moment seems to be like a noob champion and everyone looks at her as a noob champion, but he also says she's really underrated and she has actually a lot of strength and is a very solid pick because she can initiate and nuke out at the exact same time. The only bad thing about her is her laning phase and getting ganked, but other than that, she's very strong and she's extremely popular in China and very good. And I mean, that's kind of about it for this video. There's still a lot of other points that he talks about that I haven't mentioned just because I don't think they're as important or they're not really related to the current meta. There's just other things he mentions. So if you want to have a full in-depth read of everything that Dopa or Apdo has to say after reaching rank 1 in Korea, I have a link down below, like I said at the beginning of the video. Definitely click that and check it out for yourself. But even having said that, I still feel like all the information that was discussed in this video that Apdo has talked about is all very interesting. I mean, it's a lot of information that I personally never really knew or never really thought about, so I know that I personally definitely learned a thing or two. The insight that Apdo or Dopa has onto League of Legends is honestly mind-blowing. This guy is an absolute god at this game. He plays it like chess, he's always thinking ahead, and he's extremely calculated. But either way, guys, I mean, like I said, that is about it for this video. If you did enjoy this and some interesting insight into Apdo's thoughts in solo queue and maybe learned a thing or two or whatever, definitely hit that like button to show your support. Make sure to share this with your friends so everyone else has an idea as to what the best or one of the best players in League of Legends has to say and his thoughts and his secrets to solo queue. And what he had to say about Aurelion Sol and especially Yasuo. Honestly, I was a little surprised as to what he had to say about Yasuo. I didn't think I would hear that, but I mean, I'm not going to argue with the man. This guy is an absolute legend, so if that's what he says, then that's what I'm personally going to believe. But either way, guys, thank you all so much for watching. Hope to see you for the next video. Peace.